We're here with author and entrepreneur Stuart Cohen to talk about his company Invisible World Clothing. Good morning, Stuart, and how are things in Juneau, Alaska this morning?
Very snowy. There's high avalanche hazard warnings out right now.
That sounds like that could get exciting fast.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you this morning, how did the idea of selling all these amazing authentic clothes from around the world take shape?
Well, originally it was very simple. I was down in Ecuador, and I was I think I was 25 at the time, and I saw some sweaters in Otavalo, and I thought, gosh, if I could buy some of those sweaters and I could sell them in Alaska, and I could make enough money to come back here. And that's how it began, and that's still basically what we're doing.
Very cool. So it kind of facilitated your travels initially.
Yes, and it still does.
Was that the first product that you sold?
Yeah, the first product we sold were the sweaters from Otavalo, and they were, at that time they were very primitive. They've come a long way. At that time the dyes would run and that sort of thing, and gradually they've gotten much more sophisticated, and the quality has gotten really excellent and very uniform. And so we're still selling them, and actually we're selling them, I believe, for about the same amount that we were selling them for in 1984. Price has gone up and down, but, that's where it is now.
Well, that's amazingly rare these days.
Yeah, it is.
When did Invisible World come about, and what inspired you to start the company?
Well, one thing I will say is Invisible World never does anything just for the money. The decisions that we make in terms of how to getting into a product line and that sort of thing have to do with whether it'd be interesting to go there, whether it's a place we want to do business, and whether we're interested in those products.
Your company shares the same name as one of your novels. How did that come about?
Well, originally the business had a different name, but as we began dealing with more countries and doing more travel, the idea formed in my head that the things that we got, the products, which were from Bolivia and Peru and Inner Mongolia, places where people have heard of but have never been to, that these products formed a sort of map of an invisible world in people's imaginations. And that idea that sprang from all the travel for the business got reinforced in my mind and eventually became a novel called Invisible World, which explores that idea in depth. And I was fortunate with that. That was my first novel, and that came out in, was translated into 6 languages, and it's kind of all one. The store, the novel, life, it's all one.
I have to ask that traveling to all of these fascinating locations and exploring new cultures must be pretty amazing. Are you still able to enjoy these experiences while performing your business duty?
Oh, definitely. For one thing, we've been dealing with some of our suppliers for 25 years. So at this point, they're friends. Often I stay at their houses, and it's always interesting to go down and talk to people who are in business and talk to them about the economy and politics and those sorts of things. It's also fascinating to see what happens in these countries over time. And you might think going to the same places over and over again might become boring, but it's not, because it's sort of a different kind of tourism. It's being a tourist through time. And some of these countries, I've seen them go through 3 different currencies and many different governments, and it's just fascinating. As I said, basically I consider myself a tourist. So.
Well, I've got to travel a lot in my life, but never as extensively as you, so I doubt that I would ever find your adventures boring. Now, many consumers these days, they want to know that their purchases are creating a positive effect on the world and the people that are producing them. Your products are unique in that aspect. Tell us about the people who produce Invisible World products.
We deal with small family-owned companies all over the world, and we deal with a very wide variety of people. Some of our suppliers are Otavalan Indians in northern Ecuador that speak Quechua and Spanish. Others are Chinese yuppies, and others are American expatriates living in Bolivia, or sometimes wealthy South Americans. And so the money is going directly from us to the producers, and then it goes from them to the knitters and that sort of thing. In a business that requires a lot of skill, where you're using a lot of hand labor to make a complex product, which is what we're dealing with, you really can't mistreat your workers. You have to treat your workers well in order to keep them. So the people that we're working with generally are well paid on the scale of the countries that they are from, and often extremely well paid. So it's not like we're dealing with an agricultural product where labor is interchangeable. Because it's a complex, skilled labor, people tend to earn decent wages.
What sets the Invisible World products apart from department store clothes that you can get anywhere?
Invisible World's niche is exotic fibers from exotic places. That's how I think of it. And they're materials that aren't easy to find, such as alpaca and cashmere or hand-woven silk, and they usually have a lot of handwork. Department store clothes, on the other hand, tend to be more industrially produced.
Yeah, no question. Now, what kind of feedback do you get from your customers when they receive these garments from around the world?
I think usually people are very pleased. Occasionally you might have something that doesn't fit or something like that, but I think usually people are very pleasantly surprised, because Invisible World clothes, what we intend for them to be is kind of a link between the people who made them and the cultures that they come from, and then the people who end up buying them and wearing them. So usually people are delighted with them.
Well, the next product that I have a question about is cashmere. Like most, I love the soft feel of cashmere. Share with us how Invisible World came to sell cashmere garments.
We started selling cashmere because I was in a store in Beijing and I saw a cashmere sweater for sale there. And it said, Edouard's Cashmere Company, Dongsheng, Inner Mongolia. And I thought, Inner Mongolia. That would be a really interesting place to go. I wonder what it'd be like to go to Inner Mongolia in the dead of winter. And I just became more and more obsessed with that idea. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go to Inner Mongolia in January, the coldest part of the year, and I'm going to try and get into the cashmere business just because I think it'd be interesting. And I'm going to write a story about it as I do it. And so two things happened. One is I went there, and Invisible World got into the cashmere business, and the story that I began on that trip became my first novel, Invisible World, and in which one of the characters does make a journey to Inner Mongolia. Now it's about antique textiles and friendship, and it's about the trip that everybody has a trip that they've never made, and Invisible World is about that trip. But that's how we got into the cashmere business.
That is a really great story. I can almost picture you laying it all out and making the trip.
It was pretty crazy.
Now, when you're talking about your cashmere products and your trip to Mongolia, is that where your cashmere products come from?
Well, most fiber. One thing about cashmere is 60% of the world's cashmere fiber, or maybe about that much, comes from China, and most of that is from Inner Mongolia. We've dealt with cashmere suppliers from all different parts of China. We started in Inner Mongolia, and then went to Shenzhen, and then went to Beijing, and now in Shanghai. But the yarn still comes from Inner Mongolia. I'm not making the long truck out there anymore, though.
So how did you come to find your supplier in Mongolia?
Oh, that was crazy. All I had, this was the days before the Internet. Things have changed a lot since the Internet came along. But in those days, there was no Internet, and even faxes were kind of iffy. This was 1991, so even fax machines were not very widespread. And people often would do business through a telex machine that belonged to a hotel or travel agency. But I managed to somehow, I don't remember how, but I got the name of I think it was called the Inner Mongolia Industrial Products Import-Export Company, something like that. And it had some long bureaucratic Chinese name. And I got their fax number, but I could never get through to it. It turns out that two of the numbers were transposed. I think I got it through the Chinese embassy. And so all I had was this name. So I got on a train with just this name and without a telephone number and figured, well, I'll go to Huahata, which is the capital of Inner Mongolia, and see if I can track these people down. Now, this was speaking only a few words of Chinese. My Chinese at that time was rudimentary at best. So I got on the train, and on the train I met this young man who spoke a little bit of English, and he helped me out, and it took a lot of effort, but he found the company, and then I went to the company, and they had an English speaker, and then we were off to the races. There were a lot of problems along the way, too, but it finally all worked out.
So tell me, what is unique about the Mongolian culture that you'd like to share with Invisible World customers?
Well, we're talking about Inner Mongolia. And so Inner Mongolia was the part of the steppes. Okay, the Chinese were at odds with the Mongols and the barbarians on their northern border for a couple of thousand years, a couple thousand years. That's why they built the Great Wall. And so basically what they did is they built the Great Wall, and they said, this part in here, within the Great Wall is Inner Mongolia, okay? You don't come in here. The part beyond the Great Wall is Outer Mongolia. You can have it. It's too crazy out there. Just stay out there and we'll leave you alone. And so that's how the names Inner Mongolia and Outer Mongolia came about. And that's why China still controls part of what is that area of Mongolia where Mongol people live. What I find interesting about that area is that often what would happen is the Mongols that were living outside the Great Wall, or other barbarian tribes, the Khitai and other groups, the Jurchen, they would, by living in close proximity to the Chinese, gradually they started to kind of want the things that the Chinese had, and they'd start to get into agricultural instead of being completely nomadic, and they would start to learn about silk, and they wanted those things, and they would often set up their own pseudo-Chinese dynasties outside the Great Wall. And sometimes they would come in and take over China. There's some Chinese dynasties that are actually like Mongols. The last Chinese dynasty was the Qing dynasty, was the Manchu that ended in 1911. And they were actually originally from beyond the Great Wall. So it fascinated me, that area fascinated me in that it was still China, but it had a very strong influence of these nomads, and I did actually take one trip where I just went up way out there and found somebody to host me and be my guide, and just rode horses around the steppes for 5 or 6 days, which was very interesting. So that's what interests me about that area, that blend of this kind of crazy nomadic Mongolian culture and this very staid, methodical Chinese culture. That's where they met.
That is really fascinating. I feel like I've learned more about China in this interview than I have in school. So tell me, how is cashmere unique compared to wool as a clothing fiber?
Cashmere is softer. It's a much finer fiber and a shorter fiber in general, though there's different grades of cashmere and there's different grades of wool. But in general, it's finer, lighter, warmer, and a bit more fragile.
So here's that question again. You said it's kind of like choosing your favorite child. What's your favorite Invisible World cashmere product?
Oh, well, it's the V-neck sweater for men. That's what I wear. I have, of course, I could wear any sweater I want, but it seems like I always end up wearing cashmere. It's just comfortable. It's like wearing a sweatshirt. It's casual, and I just really like it. I use it snowboarding too, because it's very, very warm.
You must be the only person I know that's ever snowboarded in a cashmere V-neck sweater.
Oh, well, now I notice like Patagonia is selling it in their catalog, and they call it a quote-unquote technical fiber. So they've got their own kind of little marketing spin on it. But the fact is, cashmere is extremely warm, and it's very light. And the good thing about a cashmere sweater is it'll keep you warm when you're outside, but since it's lightweight, when you walk indoors, you don't start roasting.
Well, I'll have to check out the complete product line on the website. Thank you for that, Stuart.
You're welcome.
Once again, Stuart, we appreciate you sharing your knowledge, experiences, and yourself with all of us. That was author and entrepreneur Stuart Cohen, founder of the online clothing store Invisible World. You can see all of these great clothing products and Stuart's novels at invisibleworld.com.